Hello, everyone, and welcome to MedEd Views, the MedEd News podcast series. I'm Joshua Slatko, host of the podcast and contributing editor for MedEd News. Our guest today is Mike Lieberman, Chief Integrated Strategy Officer at Fifth Element. Mike has a long and varied background in both the science and business of health. He has a Ph.D. in neuroscience and ran a research lab studying mechanisms of chronic pain at UCB before moving to the agency side to work on medical strategy, software development, and AI for Area 23, Click, and others. Now he's one of the industry's strongest advocates for the development and use of AI tools to take over the drudge work so that agency creatives can focus more on big ideas and strategic insights. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining us on the show today.
Happy to be here.
You have taken sort of a circuitous path in your career to where you are today. So I was hoping you could sort of narrate us through that, the academic part of it, the pharma part of it, and the agency part of it.
Sure. So yeah, I feel like I talk to a lot of people who, when they wind up in pharma advertising, are like, this is not what I envisioned when I was, 5 years old. And like, that's, I always tell people that's fine. I feel like everyone kind of has their own path that gets them there. But yeah, I actually started out training as an academic neuroscientist. I spent a number of years doing academic research in San Francisco, and then I got my PhD in New York, and then I moved to England to do research there, and that was all kind of cellular neuroscience, so understanding some of the basic biology behind schizophrenia initially for my PhD work, and then kind of moving into pain, chronic pain models, trying to figure out like why people have pain that doesn't go away, that can't be treated with things like opioids and NSAIDs. And then while I was doing that, I kind of got the attention of UCB Pharma in Belgium, and they were kicking off a pain program. And they brought me in to kind of help be one of the investigators who was going to be exploring new mechanisms of treating chronic pain. And it was kind of a fit for UCB because they've been the epilepsy company forever. And a lot of the basic mechanisms of chronic pain are sort of similar to what you see in epilepsy. You've got these neurons and then they're active when they're not supposed to be. And that's why people who have chronic pain, they feel pain even when there's nothing painful that's causing it. And so it was sort of a natural fit. And I spent some time doing some work there on their NAV 1.7 program, which sadly never went anywhere. But it was a lot of fun. And, I got the chance to live abroad and to get a feel for the pharmaceutical industry and to serve on some cross-functional teams, and including ones that involved groups from the commercial side, and that kind of got me interested in the commercial part of pharmaceutical development. And so this was 2010, kind of the height of the financial crisis, and I decided, okay, I kind of want to move back to the US. There weren't really jobs in research at the time. That was another one of those moments when the pharma industry was shedding lots and lots of employees. And so I thought, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here to pivot and move into the commercial side. And so I saw an opening for a job at an agency which is no longer around, but called Agency RX, working on the medical team there, and decided to move back and take that role. And that got me into pharma marketing and medical. It was a combination med comms and promotional medical communications role. And it was fun. It was interesting. I got a chance to work on all sorts of disease states I had never touched before. We had the cell gene hematology oncology portfolio, and so I got to work on brands like Revlimid, which are like revolutionary in the space, and then also explore some of the more niche areas of the pharmaceutical landscape. And then at the time, Tim Hawkey from Area 23 just sent me a note on LinkedIn, as he did at the time. Just we're finding random people who we thought had interesting backgrounds, and said, "Hey, we're starting up this company called Area 23. You want to come and talk about it?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And this was actually back when it was on 23rd Street, which was the origin of the name. And so I had a very long, very weird interview with Tim Hawkey and Renee Mellis. And I see you're laughing. So if you know either of them, you can picture what that was like. it went on for like an hour and a half, and they were like in and out of the room and asking all these weird questions. At one point, Renee said, "Okay, so pretend you're pitching for a drug, and this drug stops people from farting. Like, go." And I was like, okay." So I went to Area 23 and kind of helped start up their medical strategy team, but always with a sort of an eye towards like, how can we find ways to automate, and where are places where you can put technology into the workflow of the day to day for pharmaceutical marketing. So there for a while, it was a lot of fun. It was kind of like the major growth phase for Area 23. And then I got an opportunity to go work for Click in a little bit of a different capacity, leaning a little bit more on the technology side of the work that I had been doing. And so I helped with a couple other people start up the Click Consulting Group. And so that was really kind of a niche consultancy that's still operating and doing quite well, and focused on working with non-marketing parts of pharmaceutical companies that needed kind of smart people that understood the commercial implications of the work that they were doing to come in and help them solve problems, often around the idea of like a tech build. And that went pretty well. And then I started up what they called the Click Foundry, which was really very specifically focused on AI and software development tools. And this was like 2021, 2022. So like some of the predecessors to ChatGPT were starting to emerge, and it was like a chance to start building some of these things out and figuring out like, oh, what can we do and where can we deploy them and how can we get them, working and used. And so it was a great chance to learn with some really smart people and learn more about AI and get really, really deep into the technology and some of the math behind it and get my hands dirty coding my own stuff. And then I had a chance to go back and work with Renee and Tim at IPG, this time at McCann Health New York. And this was prior to when all that was merged into FCB. So I came back and was part of the leadership team for McCann Health New York. That got merged into FCB. And then I took over Area 23 on Hudson, which was a medcoms agency, working with a guy named Jason West. And so we managed that agency for a while. And again, like figuring out ways to grow it, new ways to do the work. And that was fun. So, we did that for a while. And then things were looking a little shaky in terms of prospects within the Omnicom IPG world. And so I thought, okay, maybe now's the time to explore pharma side again. So I went to briefly work for a company called Nervati Neurosciences, kind of harkening back to my roots in neuroscience, working more in med affairs for an early preclinical drug called Radiprado, which funnily enough, I had actually worked on at UCB in Belgium like 15 years prior. Did that for about 6 months. And then I talked to Bob Blink, who I had known way back from the Hudson Global days. And he said, "Hey, I'm starting a new agency. We want to like put AI as the center of it and figure out a way to like start from the ground up, build a new agency around this idea of technology integration with some folks you might know. Do you want to come?" And I said, "You know what? Why not?" So that's where I am now. The company's called Fifth Element, and we're off to a fun start, but we're only a few months into our journey.
So it seems you've been thinking about AI in healthcare communications before the world at large even knew AI was a thing. Now that it has become a thing and perhaps the big thing in the industry, how do you feel pharma agencies are doing in taking advantage of AI to actually create value for themselves and their clients, and how much of it is still just air and hype?
It's a mix of both, I will say. So if you had asked me 10 years ago who are going to be the leaders in bringing technology to agencies, I would not have said art directors and copywriters. But frankly, that's what's happened. Like if you look at agencies and the people who have really jumped onto AI, in my vision, in my opinion, the way it should be used, it's the creative teams. Like from the start, they were like, you know what? It takes a lot of work to do like basic concept sketches and preliminary conceptual work and manuscript drafts. We can use this. We can make it faster. We can get stuff that like looks okay and get a read on it. And then we bring in our own expertise to actually create the final product. And so like the creative teams have been amazing, I feel like across the industry and picking up on this and running with it. I feel like because of the different tech stacks, a lot of people are using Adobe, and Adobe works very well within the Adobe system, but it doesn't really play well across the whole suite of kind of technological tools that you typically see in pharma marketing. And that's, a mix of Google Office and Microsoft Office, and even things like SharePoint and all your routing softwares and Viva. Like Adobe is its own thing, and so for a while, I think the creative teams were like great at doing this, but it was very siloed. And now, to your point, there's been all this talk about AI, and it's like, okay, what else can we do? And I feel like there's been a little bit of a stall there. There's a couple platforms that you see out there for things like aggregating insights, the stuff that you would have like an open AI chat GPT agent go out and search the web and come back and come up with some really good synthesis of all the information that's out there. We built some things when I was at IPG with a couple really smart people that were a little more proactive in how that worked for like building really kind of sophisticated agent models. And that was cool, but it was very much internal. And I feel like that's where a lot of the value is. You can take a lot of these processes that are laborious and not much fun, and the people who are doing them are kind of overtrained, and say, hey, look, we're gonna have an AI tool come in and it's gonna automate 60-70% of it. You look at it, you figure out what's valuable, you put your own stamp on it, make it creatively interesting, strategically relevant, and then take it to a client. That's a huge time save, and it's a huge benefit for agencies and for clients if you do it right. What it's not, though, is it's not a big upsell because you're giving the same work that agencies were doing before. So I think a lot of agencies have focused on that other area where it's like, okay, what else can we do that we couldn't before with AI? And then we can create new offerings for pharma clients, open up new markets, interact with the customers in new ways. And that's been the heavy focus for a lot of companies. And I think it's been a mixed bag in terms of reception. Like some areas, like creating omni-channel ecosystems, like starting to see some use of AI that's real there and that's interesting there, and creating things like virtual personas and digital twins for kind of simulating market research, testing new types of materials before they go to market. But I think there was this thought process when like ChatGPT first came out that it'll be like, this is the easy button for pharma marketing, and you can press a button and all of a sudden you'll have this creative campaign and it's going to be approvable and it's going to be amazing, it's going to look great, it's going to win awards, and no one's going to have to do any work. And like, it just didn't work out that way. I mean, if you go to LinkedIn and you look at the posts there, 80% of them are generated by some AI LLM, and you can tell right away, and it's like the most mind-numbing garbage. And you would never want somebody to give that to a client and be like, "Here's our work," because it would just be embarrassing. So I think it's being used in some places, but there's opportunity to do a lot more.
So you said that the art directors have been the first ones on the surfboard, but what barriers would you say still remain to effective AI adoption in pharma marketing? What is preventing the technology from becoming more useful?
I think it's a couple things. I mean, certainly we're in a very highly regulated industry. And so everything that needs to get out there, number one, you need to have a license to the content. And I know that's an ongoing issue with AI. And a lot of these AI tools were trained on copyrighted material, and there's some lawsuits going on around that. So again, you would never want to just take something that came out of Midjourney and give it to a client. It's like it's a starting point. It's not a finished product. The other is around approvability. And so, anybody who's worked in the industry will tell you things go back and forth with your product review teams on the client side over and over again to make sure that you're not falling afoul of OPDP regulations in terms of things you can say and what you can do. And obviously, companies have their own internal guidelines for that. And so, directing it in AI to come up with something original and approvable on its own is tricky. And I think a lot of companies are a little bit gun shy just in terms of really pushing AI into the process end to end because they're afraid of incurring regulatory risk, whether that's on the client side or the agency side, which often kind of mirrors the client side and how things are set up. So that's been a bit of a barrier. I mean, I will say though that like most things, these companies are run by people, and most of these people are reasonable. So if you go to them, you don't like try to hide the fact that you're doing work with AI. You're like, hey, look, we want to use AI. You're going to benefit from efficiency and time. We're going to benefit from like being able to do more work and more interesting things for you. Like, here's what we want to do. Here's how we want to use it. Can we just get an agreement in place that makes that okay? Like, they're generally like, okay, sure, follow these rules, and we're all going to abide by them, and it's fine.
So I feel like some of the pushback in the creative world regarding AI has to do with balancing it against human craft and human judgment. I guess the question is, how do you foresee that balance being struck in the future? I feel like there needs to be a place for great human craft and human judgment in the world of AI. Where does the balance get struck between the two, and how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. There's not a magic AI button that's going to replace an agency. I think what it's going to do is the AI tools they're going to make it faster to get from A to B to C to D to E, where E is your final product. But that last step, and even that last two steps, maybe, you need somebody who understands fundamentally the business problems that the company is looking to solve, to look at it and say, okay, we need to change this language, we need to change this visual, we need to think about how we are interacting with customers and which customers we're interacting with to make it actually meaningful from a commercial standpoint. And so I think that expertise is very hard to replicate for AI. And that's where people are going to need to be part of the loop in terms of creating content, because it's very hard to just say, okay, ChatGPT, you are now a brilliant strategist. Come up with a great brand plan. And ChatGPT will pretend to do that. And you're like, isn't this the same brand plan you did for this other product? And it's like, hey, you're right. Let me change it. So I think there really is still room for great craft and for great thinking. And also, I mean, I'm a strategist, right? So like the strategic thinking, the understanding what makes people do what they do and how we can use that to help solve problems for companies is very much a place where there's still a real need for human expertise.
From an agency standpoint, where do you think AI as presently available can have the largest near-term impact? And then where do you see its impact growing 5 or 10 years down the line? It's not quite ready for the show now, but in 5 or 10 years it might have an impact.
Yeah. Okay, good, really good question. And I think that there's a handful of off the shelf tools that are starting to get at this. Things like Jasper or OK. Some of the AI search tools like Perplexity are nice for doing some of the stuff I was saying in terms of like automating the research part of doing work, and then the initial content creation. I think where we see a lot of time wasted in the agency process is on rounds of review. And so we've actually built our own tool that sits on top of an LLM that you can train to do all the most kind of mundane work for like check changes. Hey, there were 15 different things that needed to change in this document before it goes to review. Did they change? Like what an optimal problem for a computer to solve, rather than having a copywriter make the change, send it to editorial, somebody in there goes and checks it, and then it gets routed back, and then they sign off, and then like that's like an hour of everybody's day that got wasted. And I think that kind of stuff, that kind of process integration is where we're going to really start to see some acceleration as it becomes easier and easier for this sort of thing to get done. I think 5, 10 years in the future, we'll probably have whole, I don't want to say like agency work streams where you've got your agency suite, and again you just like press a button, but probably types of deliverables for clients, whether it's a particular slide deck where you've fed it a variety of different headlines and images and specific content and references that can be like 90% end to end for something like that. Or social media posts where we're doing derivative content generation. So we've taken something that is already approved and in the market. We need to spice it up again, put a little headline change, move things around a little bit, have a little bit of a different visual, but essentially it's approved content. I think creating a lot of those is going to be much, much more automated. We're going to see a lot less need of people to do that sort of work, but it's the thinking is not going to go away, I don't think.
So agencies yesterday, today, and in the future are always looking for new offerings that they can provide to pharma clients, new ways that they can make money. What do you think are some potential new offerings that may come out of agencies now that they have AI tools available to create them?
Yeah, I think there are some exciting areas where we're starting to see better and better use of AI. So things like AI avatars are quite cool. And I don't know if you've seen those, but essentially, yeah, you can create a visual of a person and you have an AI model trained to make that person, and then you give it different scripts and those, and you can create a video of a person making those scripts, and it's almost being able to be done on the fly now. So you give it a script, and then you say, okay, actually, no, we need to make this change, and then you make the change, and all of a sudden you have a video of this person saying something new. And I think we're like two steps away probably from having interactive video AI generated content where you can literally communicate with an avatar of whoever you want in real time. And I think that's pretty exciting for things like convention booths, but also for things like landing pages on a pharma website. Right now you've got your little chat bubble that comes up, and a lot of those follow these pre-programmed scripts. It's not too far-fetched to imagine either a video interface or a much more immersive chat AI enhanced interface that is going to allow you to have a real conversation responding to the types of questions that a patient might have or a physician might have with the appropriate regulatory guardrails already baked in. So I think that is pretty interesting, and I think is going to make it more fun for the clients and all the people who use it as well.
You mentioned at the beginning, this is a highly regulated industry. It is a risk averse industry. And I think perhaps the greatest fear regarding AI is tied around its accuracy, potential regulatory risk, and the fact that there's not a person or a person's decision that you can necessarily point to if something goes wrong or something is incorrect. How do you think agencies need to think about responsible use of AI in that sort of an environment?
It's funny because every time I talk about AI to clients, I get that question, and it's a good question. I just feel like it's a question that's rooted in how a lot of these AI systems were performing a year or two ago, and there's been a lot of progress since. So, number one, I would say agencies need people who work for them to understand that you don't just give an LLM AI a prompt and then you take that prompt and you cut and paste it into an email and send it to a client ever. I mean, you would absolutely never want to do that, partially to make sure that everything it's saying is accurate, and partially because like you want to be able to make sure your thinking gets applied to it. But around the question of accuracy and making up sources, I think the more agencies have people who understand the platforms and how to work with them, how to customize the way you can have your own tools interact with these platforms, the less of an issue that becomes. So I'll give a perfect example. You can very, very quickly and easily build a tool on top of the OpenAI platform that allows you to have like a repository information that you can access via chat, and you can ask it questions, and you can say, okay, stay constrained within that world of information, and then all you'll ever get back is references that are already included in there. You can also say, okay, open up to the larger world of information, but we're going to set something called a temperature. And a temperature, imagine on one end of the spectrum from like 0 to 10, 0 being Bill Nye the Science Guy and 10 being the sleaziest used car salesman you can imagine. Like you can set the temperature, right? And so if you set it to 10, it's going to make up whatever you want, and it's going to sound flowery and exciting, and it'd be totally unrealistic. You can never actually do it. But if you set the temperature low enough, it's not going to create these AI hallucinations that are just confabulation of things that sound like they could be real, but they are totally fabricated. So that's what I would recommend is set your temperature low. And if you look at a tool like a Perplexity, that's exactly what it's doing. It's just a very, very low temperature search based on top of an open AI platform that gives you like real links to real information. And trust but verify. So test it, try it, use it a bunch of times, make sure you're getting what you expect, and then you can have some confidence that what it's giving you is actually like properly sourced information, that you're not making things up.
To what degree do you think clients are fully aware of how much agencies are using AI in their processes right now? And to what degree do you think they should be aware? How explicit do you think agencies should be about their use of AI tools when developing material for clients?
I think you should be very transparent and explicit. And I think, again, clients are people, they're reasonable. If you tell them, hey, look, here's how we're going to be using AI. We're not going to ever just hand something off to you where we have a process in place for making sure that what we give you is accurate. And not only that, but the fact that we're using it means that we can offer you deliverables at a lower cost. They'll be happy about that. So I think in some regards, clients probably expect us to be using AI a lot because they're using it too for refining emails and condensing brand plans and coming up with succinct bullet points to reflect large masses of materials. I think they expect that. I think they expect it on the creative side in terms of initial content development, and we're open about that, and they're encouraging it when we talk to groups in pharma procurement who are the ones who are going out looking for agencies. They're asking you, what's your AI policy? How do you use AI? How do you connect your AI usage to things like cost efficiency? These are questions that come up all the time. So I think the more open and transparent you are, actually the more it works in your favor. And the more explicit you are, I think the more a client can be like, you know what? Like this is twice now you've screwed up. So like, how about we don't use AI and you use all of your human fail safes to make sure this isn't happening in the future? But at least then they know that it's a failure of the AI process and that needs to be revised as opposed to the individuals who are working on it. So I think there's an expectation there that people are using it, and I think the more we talk about it and the more we encourage our teams to use it and train them how to use it properly, I think the better it's going to be for everybody.
Have we reached the point where AI is actually changing the way agencies are staffing and delivering work to clients? If we haven't reached that point, I know we will eventually. And either way, how is that going to change the way that agencies staff and deliver work? How is it going to change the way the headcount looks at an agency? Who is there? What kind of talent they're looking for? Who they're hiring?
I think that's a question that is very top of mind for a lot of people, especially given all of the big events that have been happening in the industry over the past year. So certainly, I think Wall Street expects that agencies will be reducing headcount and replacing those people with AI. I think it's starting to happen more in the junior higher level as we see that some of those really basic research functions that don't require deep industry knowledge, deep commercial knowledge, deep product knowledge that we would expect of somebody more senior can be kind of semi-automated with AI tools. So I think from a hiring perspective, it probably does mean that you can do some of the same work with fewer headcount. So what people who are looking for jobs should probably keep in mind is you need to know how to work with AI so that you're not saying I'm being replaced by AI. You're saying I am being enabled by AI to do more with fewer people, because I think that's going to be a lot of the expectation going forward. I think what it could mean for the industry, though, is a good thing in that smaller, more independent shops have typically had trouble being able to meet the expectations of execution for very, very large brands, because a client comes in and says, I've got this billion-dollar brand, I'm not going to trust it to an agency of 15 people. But if that agency of 15 people is well trained on the use of AI and shown that they can actually work effectively with it, then it's reasonable for them to kind of put their hat in the ring. And so I would expect to see more and more smaller independent agencies that are coming up as a consequence of this, because you don't need a giant mass of people to get the work done. And then having all of those different voices out there in the marketplace is just going to make everybody's work better, I think.
You mentioned client expectations. How do you think client expectations of agencies have changed over the last couple of years due to the influence of AI and anything else in the marketplace? What are clients expecting from their agencies now that they didn't expect a couple of years ago? And what are they going to expect 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line that they might not expect now?
I think they're expecting more with less, frankly. I think they're expecting the same quality work, if not more work, with fewer people for fewer dollars. And that's likely not going to change. And we might see even more of that in the future, with the expectation that AI is going to fill some of those gaps in terms of speed to create deliverables, the number of people you need, how much things are going to cost in order to get things to market. So things like a fixed fee model can actually make more sense to a client there, because they're used to billing on time and materials, and you're like, well, your time is actually an AI tool. It's not a person sitting there doing the work. So like maybe it makes more sense to switch the way that you bill the work. I think that that is likely going to continue to accelerate. And at a certain point, I think we're gonna hit a reasonable plateau where we say, okay, like this is the new expectation of what AI can do, of what an AI enabled agency can do, and barring some major shift in the way AIs work, we're probably not going to see like a massive jump in productivity over that. But I don't think we've reached that plateau yet.
Value is a popular word in
Hmm.
our business. Do agencies create value? How do they create value? What is value? What does it look like to a client? What do you think strategic value looks like today that's different than what it looked like 5 or 10 years ago? And how do you think that might change in the future?
I think that historically there had been a lot of emphasis on strategic value centered around the idea of the big campaign idea. And you had a single campaign, and you would spend hours and hours and weeks and months doing comprehensive interviews and ethnographies and talking to people and patients and caregivers and mid-level providers and HCPs in every country to get those core insights that can drive that campaign. And then you do the most to amplify that campaign. And I think we're really seeing a shift away from that now. I think the idea of understanding your customers is never going to go away. We all need to always be vigilant of really trying to like dig into the mindset of everyone who's meaningful, that a brand can touch. But I think what we're seeing now is clients finally starting to understand the value of taking a more omni-channel approach. And this is borrowing a lot from the world of consumer marketing. That's, I would say, a couple years ahead of where pharma is in terms of an omni-channel. But it's not really about the single big campaign and the giant ad. It's about all the various touch points along the way of reminder ads and banner ads and things that aren't flashy and huge, but actually carry significant value in terms of brand recognition and knowing specific data points about a brand that at the time of treatment choice really are what's going to be making people choose your product over a competitor's product. And I think we're starting to see interest in areas that had historically been thought of as like playing second fiddle to promotional advertising and things like medical communications, where like a lot of our customers, a lot of the healthcare providers are really they're seeing the value in med comms and actually like understanding the landscape, the product, like all the different clinical trials and publications and real world evidence to back up a product and to inform their decision making, and less emphasis on the single big campaign. And so I think strategically agencies need to be comfortable with that fact, and with the fact that we're going to be delivering not just one giant ad, but lots of small ads in an orchestrated approach that mimics how people interact with information, where they are along their kind of journey from belief A to B to C to D to E to all the way to G, where they're going to decide, okay, now I'm ready. This is my product of choice.
What else do you think is going to differentiate the successful agency of the future from the rest of the gang that might not necessarily be front of mind right now? What is going to make the next Area 23, the next agency that shakes up the industry?
I think there's been a lot of focus again on big campaigns, like meaningful artwork, moving away from the, elderly couple with the golden retriever on the beach to more striking imagery and things that people can remember. But I think what clients are starting to ask themselves is we've done that. Now, how do we connect that to numbers? And so I think every decision going forward needs to be framed in the context of, okay, like what does this actually mean for the business? How is this going to drive uptake and adoption and share? And like how do we measure that and correlate it back to the marketing efforts that were done there? And I think an agency that can successfully do that, that can make those links, that can bring in a case study that's not just this really moving creative that makes you cry because of the insights, but rather that does that and then also shows, and we saw 25% script lift in these specific markets, and we can prove it because we did A/B testing in these markets where we didn't see that. I think that applying that type of rigor and analysis is really what's going to help agencies stand out.
What makes you jump out of bed in the morning? What are you looking forward to in the business?
The most exciting thing for me has always been building and creation. And I feel like in a creative industry that has a specific connotation, and me, I'm the world's worst artist. And so it has nothing to do with creating art. Like a stick figure is like a masterpiece for me. For me, it's about building tools that the people who use them actually derive real value. And they're like, oh my God, this has made my life easier. I can't believe I can do this now. Or they try it and they say, you know what, this is okay, but if it did these three other things, it would be amazing. And then we go back and we fix it, and they're like, okay, now it actually solves this real problem. For me, that's like the most fun. And I like to like get my hands dirty and write code and sit in on interviews for user experience and get into these conversations with end users and all the different clients involved to figure out like, okay, how do we craft things that solve your real problems in ways that are interesting and fun. Like for me, that there's nothing better than that.
I always like to give our guests a chance to do a bit of a choose your own adventure. Is there anything that you feel like you are dying to say to our audience, folks in the pharma and agency world, and I just haven't asked the right question to elicit it? The topic that you love to talk about, but we haven't hit on yet. Sort of ask your own question and answer it.
Okay, so I won't bore your audience to death and talk about math, although I do think math is super exciting and fun. But I will say, people talk about AI and they think Chat GPT, and Chat GPT is one subset of a flavor of AI, and there's a whole other world out there. And if you look at what companies are using, what practitioners are using when it comes to AI, it's not Chat GPT. They're building university researchers and startups and companies from things like material science are coming up with entirely new ways of assessing information and applying it to healthcare. And like that's what you should be asking yourself is not what we can do with ChatGPT. It's like what specific things can we build, can we borrow from other industries that help us really process all of the information that is relevant to healthcare decision making, patient compliance, actually modeling what's happening in a patient's body to predict their progression, and then using that in our whole marketing ecosystem to like my point is we need to use AI that's not built around words when we're doing more than just saying things. We need to use AI that is built around biology. And I think that those tools exist and it's like woefully underutilized. So the question I would ask is like, is ChatGPT the be all end all of AI? And my answer would absolutely be no. it's cool. I use it all the time. It's got its uses, but there's a whole other world out there of cool things that we can do that aren't based at all on this technology.
Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate your time and your insight.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, I hope everybody listening is had a nice holiday and gets out there and fools around with AI and isn't afraid to make an idiot of themselves trying something new.